Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about Taurus fears. And yes, this does apply and pertain to the Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. Well, anyway, people, the first thing is, as far as Taurus fears, I look at the 12th house first in the solar natal chart. I mean, Aries will often fall on it. So because of this, well, Taurus may have fear in being assertive, in taking action in situations. As many of you may know, I have Taurus rising. I've said it enough times. And I have Aries on the cusp of my 12th house. And I've had, lack of aggression, lack of assertiveness, and procrastination. Being my own undoing, probably a vast understatement. And it's often that fear of moving forward and taking that action, being aggressive in tackling situations when they need to be, can really be to Taurus's detriment, and they often have that fear of doing so. Now, also another Taurus fear, because of Aries being on the 12th house cusp in a solar natal chart for Taurus, is combat, confrontation. Taurus generally is not about confrontations. Taurus is rather passive. Don't get me wrong, if they're pushed beyond the point of their endurance, many Taurus people will fight just about anybody. But I think what it is, they just have the peace element in their life is such, peace is such a strong proponent in Taurus life, and in having that tranquility, they just really would rather just blow things off than confront them. And another fear I think Taurus has, and whether they're always aware of it or not, and it could be at least on a subconscious level, because of Aries being on the 12th house cusp in a solar natal chart for Taurus, is taking leadership and asserting themselves that way. Taurus seems to be more set out for a subordinate or subservient role, generally speaking. I'm not stereotyping and saying all Tauruses can't be leaders or anything, but it seems like, generally speaking, they're more about that subordinate role, and they seem to have a fear about taking the lead or that leadership. And anyway, and also about being outspoken as well. I think Taurus can have a difficult time doing this. Taurus, it can be direct and straightforward, but being consistently very outspoken, like in Aries, that is something that they do fear, and it's understandable why Aries often does fall on that 12th house cusp for Taurus in a solar natal chart. Now, also, a thing about Taurus is what they really fear. A lot of people would be apprehensive, and understandably so, about this, but Taurus, maybe especially on average, is revealing just their sex life. With Aries on that 12th house cusp, often in a solar natal chart being ruled by Mars, understandably divulging anything with their sex life, that's the thing that they really seem to keep under wraps more than just about anything else, I believe, as far as Taurus goes. Now, also just warfare in general. This goes to the aversion to the combat, the confrontation. Taurus is just generally not about that. They like to have their life really being in peace and having the tranquility. So, and also acting impulsively or with spontaneity. Taurus being an earth sign, they're just very, much more premeditative. They are not about acting on impulse. I think a lot of the things with Taurus is often very planned and very regimented. There's really not a lot of spontaneity in Taurus, and I think they could at least fear this on a subconscious, at least on a subconscious level. And also sharp tools as well, weapons. I think sharp tools or instruments especially, they are not, you have Aries on that cusp of the 12th house in many cases in the solar natal chart for Taurus and ruled by Mars. That is just, those are some things I think Taurus has a strong aversion to. And generally, I don't see Taurus being very good using, sharp instruments in general. And I think this has something to do with it. Anyway, well, Another thing about Taurus, you look at it where you could see potential fears, you look at the opposite sign of Taurus, which of course is Scorpio. Now, Taurus, I mean, you look at Scorpio is about upheaval and crisis, and Taurus can have a very strong anathema or aversion to it. I mean, Scorpio is the kind of sign that may just create upheaval and crisis just for the sake of doing it, where Taurus will often avoid it at any cost. They don't like to rock the boat, so to speak, and they don't really like to, I mean, to make, you know, their major changes. Scorpio, even though it's a fixed sign, they can have a strong aversion to change in general, but Scorpio is strongly about transformation, and Taurus will often avoid that at any cost. I mean, Taurus in a solar or natal chart often has Libra on the cusp of the 6th house, and I think a lot of it has to do with that. Taurus can get very complacent in their daily routine and very relaxed, and they just have a hard time moving on, so, and making major changes. So even though I don't think it's the strongest sign, I think Scorpio is the strongest sign of the zodiac. I think Taurus may unequivocally be the most fixed sign of the zodiac. Well, anyway, that being said, I think Taurus also can have difficulty looking beyond the superficial, and I mean, Taurus isn't really a superficial sign. I look at Gemini more as far as that goes, but what I mean is looking beyond what's in front of them. Taurus can have a difficult time doing that, I think, because Scorpio being the opposite sign, Scorpio is more about that looking beyond the superficial, being probing and inquiring. I think Taurus can have a fear sometimes of asking questions, because it requires speaking up and to do it, and sometimes depending on the questions they could be ones of an outspoken nature as well, and they can have trouble doing that. Also using guile and being incisive. I mean, I think the Taurus people I know, including myself, it seems like largely are generally, I mean, they're about real honesty, and I'm not saying that Scorpio isn't, but Scorpio has the ability more to use some guile, I think, than Taurus does. And Taurus just has a difficult time in doing that, I think. And anyway, and I think that it's another thing too to look at as far as Taurus and fears may go. I mean, the house where Capricorn is on in a natal chart can show where one could be maybe a little bit averse to, or evade, or avoid, or elude, and Capricorn often falls on the 9th house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Taurus. So because of this, Taurus may have the aversion to long distance journeys. I mean, Taurus just generally, I mean, I have Taurus rising. I have never been out of the country. I have never traveled abroad. I think that is just something that Taurus just generally doesn't like to do, because it requires having to make a big, it's like this big change in their mind, having to go all the way to another country, and they just don't want to be bothered. A lot of Taurus people doing that, and I think especially Taurus rising. But anyway, also with Cap on the 9th house cusp, often in a solar natal chart for Taurus, abstract thinking outside the box can be difficult for Taurus, and that might be something they may fear as well. Also higher education, I mean, that could be something that Taurus might maybe have some difficulties with, or they might have that aversion to for whatever reason. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that Taurus often is so ambitious in generating money and making income or what have you, that they don't want to necessarily always wait to have to go through a long, painstaking college course in order to get that degree, to have that position to do it. I think there's a lot of Taurus people that want to try to make some income right away, right when they get out of high school, and try to work and get a job right away. So I think that has something to do with that. Now, also in matters, I guess you could just say just in general with Taurus, and this is, I mean, Taurus is just generally a rather immovable sign, and I think the general thing about them is that they just have just a very strong aversion and fear of just making any major change in general. And also, I mean, we're talking about the 9th house again, also they're philosophical outlook. They might be rather rigid in it, and they might, and intransigent, they might not really, I mean, they might be fearful of just looking into it deeper and really trying to see it and make and see what it's about and making that change in it. They might be rather restricted and limited as far as the philosophical outlook goes. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for Taurus fears. Stay tuned next time where I'll be talking about Gemini fears. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person astrologically speaking based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.